Before OOP, programs were written in a procedural style, just a long sequence of instructions from top to bottom. As programs grew larger, this became impossible to manage, code was scattered, changes in one place broke things in another, and reusing logic was painful. OOP was invented to solve this by modeling programs the way the real world works, through objects. Think about a real-world car. A car has properties, color, brand, speed, fuel level. A car has behaviors, accelerate, brake, refuel. In OOP, you model this exactly. Properties become fields or variables and behaviors become methods, and both are bundled together inside a class. When you need an actual car, you create an object from the class. Looking at the diagram, Java OOP is built on 4 pillars. Encapsulation, which means bundling data and methods together and hiding internal details. Inheritance, where a class can inherit properties and behaviors from another class, promoting reuse. Polymorphism, where the same method name can behave differently depending on which object calls it. Abstraction, which means hiding complex implementation details and showing only what is necessary. These 4 pillars work together to make Java programs modular, reusable, secure, and easy to maintain. Everything in Java, every library, every framework, every real-world application is built on top of these OOP principles. The class-object relationship is the most fundamental concept in all of Java. A class is like an architectural blueprint for a house. The blueprint itself is not a house. It describes what the house will look like, how many rooms it will have, what features it includes. But the blueprint does not have a physical address, it does not have furniture inside it, nobody lives in it. It is just a plan. An object is the actual house built from that blueprint. It exists in the real world, has a specific address, has its own furniture, has people living in it. You can build multiple houses from the same blueprint. Each house is independent, has its own address, and can have different furniture while following the same structural plan. In Java, the dog class is the blueprint. It defines that every dog will have a name, an age, a breed, and will be able to bark and eat. But no actual dog exists until you write new dog. That statement creates a real dog object in heap memory. It has its own name, its own age, its own breed. You can create 100 dog objects from the same dog class. Each is independent with its own data, yet all share the same structure and behavior defined by the class. Looking at the diagram, the class box shows the template, with fields declared but no values yet. The object boxes show real instances, each with its own specific values for those fields. The diagram illustrates the instantiation process, where the class acts as the template on one side and the objects are the real things on the other side. A class occupies no significant heap memory by itself, only objects do. The class definition lives in the method area of JVM memory, while objects live in the heap. When you write dog d equals new dog, it looks like one simple line, but internally it triggers a precise multi-step process in JVM memory. Understanding this process deeply explains why Java behaves the way it does with objects. Step 1. Class loading. Before any object can be created, the JVM must have the dog class loaded into the method area. If it has not been loaded yet, the class loader finds the dog.class file, loads its bytecode, links it, and initializes it, where static variables are set up. This happens only once per class, not every time you create an object. Step 2. Memory allocation. The new keyword instructs the JVM to allocate a fresh block of memory in the heap, large enough to hold all the instance variables defined in the dog class. At this point, all instance variables receive their default values. Integer fields become 0, string fields become null, and Boolean fields become false. Step 3. Constructor execution. After memory is allocated, the constructor of dog is called. The constructor runs its initialization logic, setting instance variables to meaningful starting values and running any setup code. This is where the null and 0 defaults get replaced with actual values. Step 4. Reference assignment. After the constructor finishes, the new expression returns the memory address of the newly created object. This address is stored in the reference variable d in stack memory. From this point on, d is your handle to the object. Whenever you write d.name or d.bark, Java follows the address stored in d to find the actual object in the heap. Looking at the diagram, all 4 steps are shown with a flow from left to right. The stack is on the left holding d with the heap address, and the heap is on the right holding the actual object. The arrow from d to the heap object visually represents the reference relationship. A constructor is the initialization gateway for every object. The moment new dog is called, the JVM allocates memory and immediately invokes the constructor to set up the object's initial state. You never call a constructor manually, it is always triggered by new. If you do not write any constructor, Java silently provides one for you. If you write your own, Java uses yours instead. There are multiple types of constructors in Java, each serving a different purpose, and the diagram shows them all side by side. Default constructor. A constructor with no parameters. If you do not define any constructor at all in your class, Java automatically provides a hidden default constructor that does nothing except allocate memory and set default values. But if you define even one constructor, Java stops providing the automatic default and you must write it yourself if you still need it. Explicitly writing a no-argument constructor yourself is also called a default constructor. Parameterized constructor. A constructor that accepts parameters. This is the most commonly used type. It lets you pass values at the time of object creation so the object is fully initialized from the start. Without a parameterized constructor, you would have to create the object first and then set each field separately, which is more verbose and leaves the object in an incomplete state temporarily. Copy constructor. A constructor that takes an object of the same class as a parameter and creates a new object that is a copy of it. Java does not provide this automatically like C++ does, you must write it yourself. It creates a completely independent copy, meaning changes to the new object do not affect the original. Constructor overloading. Just like method overloading, you can have multiple constructors in the same class with different parameter lists. This gives callers flexibility. They can create objects with just a name, or with name and age, or with all fields, depending on how much information they have at creation time. Constructor chaining. Constructors can call each other using the this keyword with parentheses. This avoids duplicating initialization code across multiple constructors, where the shorter constructors delegate to the more complete one. This call must always be the very first statement in a constructor. When we call new dog with no arguments, the default constructor is triggered. It sets name to unknown, age to 0, and breed to unknown, then prints a confirmation message. When we call new dog with 3 arguments, Bruno, 3, and Labrador, the parameterized constructor is triggered. Inside it, the keyword this.name refers to the field belonging to the current object, while name alone refers to the parameter passed in. This distinction lets us use the same word for both without confusion. All 3 fields get assigned the values that were passed in. When we call new dog and pass in D2, which is an existing dog object, the copy constructor is triggered. It reads each field from D2 and copies the value into the new object. After the copy is done, we change D3.name to max. This only affects D3. D2 still holds Bruno because the copy constructor created a completely independent object, not just another pointer to the same one. When we call new dog with just the string Bela, the chaining constructor is triggered. Its very first line calls the parameterized constructor internally with Bela, 0, and unknown as arguments. Because of this, the parameterized constructor runs first and prints its message first. Only after the parameterized constructor finishes does execution return to the chaining constructor, which then prints its own message. The final object ends up with name Bela, age 0, and breed unknown. This is one of those keywords that seems confusing at first but becomes completely natural once you internalize what it means. This keyword simply means the current object, the specific object in heap memory whose method or constructor is currently running. Every instance method and constructor in Java has an implicit this reference available. You do not pass it, Java provides it automatically. The most common use of this is to resolve naming conflicts between instance variables and parameters or local variables. When you write a dog constructor that takes name and age as parameters, and inside the constructor you write name equals name, Java gets confused. Which name is the field and which is the parameter? Both are called name. The compiler resolves this by giving priority to the local scope, so name equals name just assigns the parameter to itself, leaving the field untouched. This is a silent bug. Writing this .name equals name explicitly tells Java to assign the parameter name to the current object's field name. This .name unambiguously refers to the instance variable, while name alone refers to the local parameter. The second use is constructor chaining by calling this with parentheses, which means calling one constructor from another in the same class. This lets shorter constructors delegate to a more complete one, avoiding code duplication. This call must always be the first statement in the constructor. The third use is passing the current object as an argument to another method or returning it from a method. This is heavily used in builder patterns and method chaining, where methods return the this keyword so you can chain multiple calls together. For example, calling setName, then setAge, then setBreed one after another on the same object in a single line, where each method hands the object back so the next call can continue on it. The first constructor takes two parameters, width and height. Both the fields and the parameters share the same name. If we wrote just width equals width, Java would assign the parameter to itself and the field would stay 0. By writing this .width equals width, we are telling Java to set the field belonging to the current object, not the local parameter. The second constructor takes only one parameter called size. Inside it, we call this with size passed twice, which hands off to the two-parameter constructor using the same value for both width and height. This creates a square box and keeps all the initialization logic in one place. The setWidth and setHeight methods each update their respective field and then return this, which means they hand back the current box object itself. So when we call b3.setWidth with 10, it updates the width and returns b3. Since b3 is returned, we can immediately call .setHeight with 20 on it without writing b3 again. This is what allows everything to happen in a single line. The static keyword is one of the most important and frequently used keywords in Java. When you mark something as static, you are saying this belongs to the class, not to individual objects. There is exactly one copy of it regardless of how many objects exist, and it can be accessed without creating any object at all. Static variables, also called class variables, are shared across every object of the class. If you change a static variable from one object, all other objects immediately see the change because they all share the same memory location. A classic use is an object count variable that increments every time a new object is created. Since all objects share it, it correctly tracks the total count. Static variables are initialized when the class is first loaded, before any object is created. Static methods belong to the class and can be called directly on the class name. They cannot access instance variables or instance methods because when a static method runs, there might be no object in existence. Math.sqrt, integer.parseInt, and arrays.sort are all static methods, pure utilities that need no object state. The main method must be static because the JVM calls it before creating any object. Static blocks, also called static initializers, run automatically exactly once when the class is first loaded into JVM memory, before any constructor runs or any object is created. They are used for complex static variable initialization, meaning operations that require more than a simple assignment, like loading a configuration file, setting up a database connection pool, or computing an initial value that requires logic. Static nested classes are classes declared inside another class with the static keyword. They can be instantiated without an instance of the outer class, unlike a regular inner class. This is useful for grouping helper classes logically inside their owner class. The static block runs the moment the LAMP class is loaded by the JVM, which happens before the main method even begins. It prints class loaded and sets totalamps to 10. This is why class loaded appears as the very first line in the output, before anything inside main executes. When we call showTotal using the class name LAMP, it is a static method so no object is needed to call it. It simply prints the current value of totalamps, which at this point is 10 as set by the static block. When we create a new lamp with the color red, the constructor runs. It increments totalamps by 1, bumping it from 10 to 11, and assigns red as the color of that particular lamp object. When we create another new lamp with the color blue, the constructor runs again. Totalamps is incremented once more, going from 11 to 12, and blue is assigned as the color of this new lamp object. When we call display on L1 and then on L2, each lamp prints its own color. This is because color is an instance variable, meaning every lamp object holds its own separate copy of it. So L1 prints red and L2 prints blue independently. When we call showTotal again at the end, totalamps now reads 12. This is because totalamps is a static variable, meaning it is shared across the entire class and all its objects. Every time a constructor ran, it incremented the same single variable. Finally, when we print lamp.totalamps directly, we get 12 again. Static variables can be accessed using just the class name from anywhere outside the class, without creating any object. Encapsulation is the first and most foundational OOP pillar. The word comes from the word capsule. Just like a medicine capsule encloses its contents and controls what goes in and comes out, a well-encapsulated class encloses its data and controls how it is accessed and modified. The implementation in Java is straightforward. Declare all fields as private so no outside class can directly touch them. Then provide public getter methods, also called accessors, that return the field value, and public setter methods, also called mutators, that set the field value. The setter is where you add validation logic. You can check if the value being set makes sense before actually storing it. For example, a setEdge setter that takes an integer can reject negative values before they corrupt your object state. This protection is impossible if age is public, because anyone could directly assign age to -50 and nothing would stop them. Looking at the diagram, the left side shows a class without encapsulation. All fields are public, so anyone can directly set age to -100 and the object silently becomes corrupt. The right side shows the same class with encapsulation. Fields are private and can only be accessed through getters and setters, where the setter validates the value before storing it. This is why encapsulation is not just about hiding. It is about maintaining the integrity and consistency of your object's data at all times. It also makes your class easier to maintain. If you need to change how a field is stored internally, you only change the getter and setter, not every place in the codebase that accesses the field. Access modifiers are the gatekeepers of Java. They determine exactly which parts of your code can see and use a class, method, field, or constructor. Java has 4 levels of access, each progressively more open than the last. Private is the most restrictive. It is visible only within the same class. Nothing outside that class can see or access it. This is the correct choice for all instance variables in an encapsulated class. Default, which means no keyword is written, is also called package private. It is visible to all classes within the same package, but invisible to classes in other packages. When you write a class or method with no access modifier at all, Java applies default access automatically. Protected is visible within the same package and also to subclass in other packages. It is the bridge between package level and inheritance level access. If you want a method to be inheritable and overridable by child classes that may live in different packages, protected is the right choice. Public is completely open. It is visible from everywhere in the entire application. Any class in any package can access a public member. The main method is public so the JVM can call it from anywhere. Looking at the diagram, the 4 modifiers are shown as concentric circles. Private is in the center with the smallest scope, then default, then protected, and then public in the outermost ring with the widest scope. The access table shows exactly which combination of same class, same package, subclass, and different package each modifier permits. As Java applications grow, you can end up with hundreds of classes. Without any organization, finding the right class, avoiding name conflicts, and managing access becomes a nightmare. Packages solve this by organizing classes into logical groups, exactly like how you organize files into folders on your computer. A package is declared at the very top of a Java file using the package keyword followed by the package name. The package name should reflect the folder structure on disk. For example, com.amazon.payments means the file is physically inside a folder path of com, then Amazon, then payments. This convention ensures that class names are globally unique. A class named user inside com.amazon and another class named user inside com.google can coexist without any conflict, even though both are named user, because their fully qualified names are different. Looking at the diagram, there are 2 broad categories of packages. Built-in packages come with Java's standard library. Some examples are java.lang, which contains string, math, and system and is auto-imported, java.util, which contains ArrayList, hashmap, and scanner, java.io, which contains FileReader and BufferedWriter, java.net, which contains URL and socket, and java.sql, which contains connection and result set. User-defined packages are packages you create yourself to organize your own project's classes. The import statement lets you use a class from another package without writing its full path every time. Instead of writing the full path of ArrayList every time you use it, you write the import statement once at the top of the file and then use just ArrayList throughout. You can import a specific class by naming it directly, or import all classes from a package using the wildcard star symbol. Note that java.lang is the only package that is automatically imported, so you never need to manually import string, system, math, or integer. Regarding types of packages, single-level packages have a simple one-word name. Multi-level packages are hierarchical, like com.company.project.module, and this is the standard in professional Java development. By convention, package names use all lowercase letters, and company packages start with the reversed domain name, such as com.google, org.apache, or com.amazon. Thank you for watching this video. I hope this explanation helped you clearly understand the basic OOP concepts and its core components in a structured and easy way. Continue learning, keep practicing, and stay consistent with your preparation. More detailed concepts are coming next.